I just want to ask one question. Are there any reporters here? Who are you covering it for?
For Netherlands radio.
What is it?
It's for the Brazilian department.
It's going to appear in Brazil?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to know, because I say things that I may not want to see it in print.
Covering right now, so.
Oh, good. Okay. Let me know when I'm on the record. So today it was covered as I was leaving work that the former president of Viacom, Tom Freston, who recently was terminated by Sumner Redstone, the chairman, that Tom will get $60 million in severance and another 10 or 20, and depending on which wire story you read, in other emoluments. You know, in my opinion, he's worth every penny. He helped to found MTV. He's a massively talented guy. I don't have a problem with the big numbers, but I can understand why everyone is here to discuss how to get a job in the media. You know, I remember just the whole concept of a golden parachute was so alien to me when I was much younger, and I considered it very unfair. But now that I've been working for about 25 years, I think it's pretty much a fair deal. I'm going to speak to you tonight in two ways, because I'm really sort of two characters, both of whom work in the media world, but in different ways. And I thought maybe I would talk to you as both, and I would like it, if it's possible, to have questions and discussion or insights or whatever you guys want to talk about as we go along, because you know, while I love to hear myself talk, I'd like to hear what you are thinking about along the way, and if we end up doing more back and forth than me just blabbing away, that would be fine with me too. The one voice that I'll speak to you from is my media voice. I work for CBS. My name is Gil Schwartz. I joined the company in 1982, when most of you were just, you know, I'm not born. And I don't hold that against you much. But, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started in what I do in the media. I'm the head of corporate communications for CBS, and what that means is all things that have to do with communications. Public relations, publicity for the many excellent shows that so few of you watch. You know, internal communications, newsletters, things like that. The kind of things that when you work for a company, they give you that to read, and unless it's done very well, it's immediately tossed away with laughter. We have a very good internal newsletter, and I'm proud of it, and that's part of what we do in my department. There's also, now that we're a freestanding corporation, there's also communications to investors and to the Wall Street community. So in short, that's sort of how I got my corporate job. Started out very small. I'll tell you about that a little bit, because I basically have the same leather recliner that I did back in the 80s. And because of the nature of corporations now and of the media world, you can have the same job with the same company, and it's sold and reorganized and turned around so much that I basically work for the same company 20 years later, but it's a completely different company. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, because it's very important as you go out into the world to see what kind of a media job you want, to understand the nature of the media world, what it's like now, because it's very different now than it was in years past. The other person who will be speaking to you tonight is my pseudonym. You all know what a pseudonym is? It's a pen name. There are many, many famous writers who have written under pen names. You ever read the book 1984? George Orwell was, his name was Eric Blair, and he worked right for the BBC. And he was George Orwell, and nobody bothered George Orwell about being George Orwell. Well, I'm tormented constantly about being Gil Schwartz, but Orwell wrote that, and you know, the poet, you know, South American genius, not Octavio Paz, but the other one. Well, Who? No, that's all right. Yeah, Neruda. Neruda's name is something completely different. He took the name Neruda for someone that he admired greatly, a Central European writer, and that's a pseudonym. So anyway, in the year about 1984, as I was getting started with my corporate career, a friend of mine who was an editor at Esquire magazine approached me and said, would I like to write a column about corporate strategy? Now, corporate strategy, I was chosen for that because I had been writing for magazines for a while, and I was the only person that these journalists that were my friends knew who actually went to an office every day and had a tie on and had to wear gray and wear really uncomfortable shoes, and which is the mark of a corporate job from then to now. Your shoes, you don't want to know from it. So. So I said, yes, I would like to write a thing on corporate strategy because it seemed to me I'd been an actor for many years, and I was a good actor. Unfortunately, I'm a physical type, and I only played murderers. But not outside of New York. But when you get to New York, you're immediately typecast. So I played like a guy, it was a show, used to be Ryan's Hope, it was on the air. So I played the sort of mentally challenged friend of the kidnapper. You know, and when I first got to New York and I was trying out for parts, I thought I was a leading man. I thought, I was, because I'd been a leading man in different things that I'd been in Boston and other places. And I got a phone call the first day I got to New York. I'd sent out my resume shots, and I got a call from As the World Turns. And they said, can you come in immediately? And I was very excited. I said, what's the part? And the casting director said, we're looking for somebody who looks like they would take a bribe. That was sort of a tip-off as to what my acting career in New York was going to be like. So I was looking for a way to make a living while I was kind of pursuing my trade, which was writing, and so I got the corporate job. But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't write a corporate strategy column for Esquire and use my own name, because the connection that I made to the theater was that when I was in the theater, I was aware that most people are crazy. The actors were crazy, certainly the stage managers were crazy. It's possible stage managers are the craziest, but we can talk about that later. Total control freaks, and with little writing in the margin of every line and stuff, and I knew my fair share of those. And of course the directors, your bosses, were crazy in the theater. Rampaging egomaniacs, tyrants, paranoid people. One guy I know who I worked for, there was a fire in our theater, and he sent a young actor into the fire to go get his Rolex. And that was typical of him, and you were supposed to love him for that. So, but then I got to the corporate world, and I recognized these same qualities in corporate bosses and in the people I worked for at all levels that I saw in the theater. I saw these nutty people. It was early 80s, and people didn't know that you weren't supposed to be drunk at lunch. Those were the good old days, let me tell you. There were very often people were in meetings between 2 and 3 back then. That was the nap time. And I recognized, sort of insanity and weirdness and millions of, stuff that you would, you guys are live in a pretty informal world. And, look at, you're all dressed informally, and your classes, even when you're working really hard, there's not a big premium on kind of looking the part. Although if you came to your classes dressed as I'm dressed, people would think you're crazy. But you don't really have a uniform. We have uniforms. So you look at corporations at your sort of stage of where you're at in life, and you think, gee, that's really different. That's different than school. That's different than that show I was in when I went to summer stock, or that's different than the musical group that I was in. When I go out with my pals and we play music for people, it's not that different. And I picked up very early that I wanted to make fun of the place I worked, and I wanted to be incredibly vicious to the people who I worked for. And so I could lose my job and write truthfully, or I could write some kind of thing like you read in a lot of magazines, which is supposedly strategy, but which is it's bullshit. Always, always make sure to have your, to sit in the right seat at the conference table so you will maintain this kind of nonsense. And meanwhile I'm looking at like raving, stark loonies that are around me, and becoming increasingly interested in how corporations work and in writing about it. So I took this pseudonym, and the pseudonym was and is Stanley Bing. And Stanley Bing is the author of books and has written for Esquire for 11 years and has now been at Fortune for more than 11 years. I'm on the back page of Fortune magazine. I know that's a must-read for all of you. But it is a good magazine and beats the hell out of Forbes. So, and the business sector as a sector is very hot. I mean, there's Condé Nast is starting a magazine. A lot of magazines that are about other things tend to focus on business people. So there's a lot of writing about business, because business for a long time in the 80s and 90s was sort of like the new rock and roll. I mean, you had a lot of really wacky people. There was a lot of drugs and sex. Now it's kind of boring, but there's still plenty of wacky stuff to write about. And certainly in your life and in everyone's life, the experience of what it's like to work, what you do when you work, is central to your life. It's even more important in some ways than who your lover is or who your person that you're with, or, until you have kids, then the kids are all consuming. They kind of brainwash you by keeping you up late and stuff. But certainly your working world is every bit as important as any other part of your life. So what I write about is, to me, central to what people care about. I mean, what keeps people up in the middle of the night? It isn't, sometimes it's world peace or what's going on with North Korea, but a lot of the time it's that you got yelled at, or that some schmuck is in your way and you don't know how to get rid of them. Or in many cases, stupid things like, there's an empty office on the floor, and either you're going to get it or Brewster's going to get it. And how can you stop Brewster from getting it? And if you don't get it, how do you make sure Brewster doesn't either? And could it be a broom closet? I mean, you see, people are so engaged. You think about school, where you are. That's really work. I mean, our first experience of pathological bosses is when we're in kindergarten and people start talking to us like this. And you think, I remember being 5. I don't really, because it's all in gray mass, but I remember being very young and thinking, why are they speaking to me that way? And the kids' shows that I liked all had sort of mild, that's why people liked Mr. Rogers all those years, because Mr. Rogers just talked to people like they were real. Hi, I'm wearing a sweater, and kids liked it, as opposed, and that's why Sesame Street was so popular with kids. And so I kind of began to write about my world, which was the working world. And so sometimes, by the way, I may refer to Bing in the third person, and yes, I am crazy. It's difficult, so I say I. What is I? Any of you take philosophy, that's a fascinating question. What's I? Who's that I that you're talking to? In a corporation, especially in a hot corporation with a lot of action, that could depend on who you're with. The corporate world is very much about face, that Japanese concept. And so in one way I'm Gil Schwartz, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. In the other way, the I is certainly the person who's written every week or every other week for 20 years and who writes books that are different than what I write when I'm Gil Schwartz. I have a column as Gil Schwartz for Men's Health. And I really like writing that column because I'm a lot nicer than Stanley Bing. But I love being and writing Stanley Bing because Bing doesn't really care about what people think, because, of course, he's hiding. I just want to ask one question. Are there any reporters here? Who are you covering it for?
For Netherlands Radio.
What is it?
It's for the Brazilian department.
It's going to appear in Brazil?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to know, because I say things that I may not want to see it in print.
Covering right now, so.
Oh, good. Okay. Let me know when I'm on the record. So today it was covered as I was leaving work. Voice, I work for CBS. My name is Gil Schwartz. I joined the company in 1982, when most of you were just, I'm not born. And I don't hold that against you much. But, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got started in what I do in the media. I'm the head of corporate communications for CBS, and what that means is all things that happen away. Everyone is here to discuss how to get a job in the media. I remember just the whole concept of a golden parachute was so alien to me when I was much younger, and I considered it very unfair. But now that I've been working for about 25 years, I think it's pretty much a fair deal. I'm going to speak to you tonight in two ways, because I'm really sort of two characters, both of whom work in the media world, but in different ways. And I thought maybe I would talk to you as both, and I would like it, if it's possible, to have questions and discussion or insights or whatever you guys want to talk about as we go along, because, while I love to hear myself talk, I'd like to hear what you are thinking about along the way. And if we end up doing more back and forth than me just blabbing away, that would be fine with me too. The one voice that I'll speak to you from is my media that the former president of Viacom, Tom Freston, who recently was terminated by Sumner Redstone, the chairman, that Tom will get $60 million in severance and another 10 or 20, and depending on which wire story you read, in other emoluments. In my opinion, he's worth every penny. He helped to found MTV. He's a massively talented guy. I don't have a problem with the big numbers, but I can understand